digital marketing agencies transform from being a market generalist, meaning serving all shapes and sizes, doing all these different things, to become a vertical market specialist. And it may be time to think about verticalizing and narrowing your focus and becoming an expert in solving one problem for a specific audience.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpoff. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I'm thrilled today to be joined by someone whose journey I admire tremendously. He has spent decades working in the agency space, was the CMO at Scorpion, which we'll spend some time talking about, and today helps agencies focus and grow faster through his vertical go-to-market strategy. He's the host of the Vertical Go-to-Market podcast and the author of Focus Vertical. So with all of that, Quinn, thanks so much for joining us today.
Marcel, I am super excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Amazing. And so just an incredible experience and background that you have being like riding a rocket ship like that. And so I want to dig into, there's three things that I want to talk about today. The first is I want to explore a little bit of what Scorpion was from a business model perspective, because it's what we're trying to do at Parakeeto. And I think it's a model that not enough people are considering. I think a lot of agency owners look at the stories of a services business that has created software like 37 Signals, and it's very much seen as like this binary path. You're either a services firm or you're a software company. Everybody is attracted to the idea of software, even though, I would argue that we've seen very clearly that the economics that we speculated SaaS companies have are not actually as real as we thought they were. But Scorpion was both and really did this interesting thing, which was a services-led technology development approach, which I think is ahead of its time for when Scorpion was doing that. It's what we're doing at Parakeeto. Talk a little bit about how Scorpion was structured in terms of the services and the technology and how that played into the rapid growth that Scorpion had.
Yeah. So I think, it was, I'll say at the front end that it was an evolution on how that sort of evolved. We did raise about $100 million in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. Large part because of the software that we had developed. So, but interestingly, it was primarily a service-led business. So I'll talk about, I'd like to share with you how we got there and what that looked like. So when I joined in 2015, it was as I mentioned, a $20 million business primarily focused on one vertical market, which is law firms and more specifically personal injury attorneys. And the culture at Scorpion at the time was, we kind of evolved the business previous to me being there, being sort of a generalist going into the legal market, made a lot of sense because, frankly, personal injury attorneys worked really well when it came to internet marketing. They got a lot of great results. It was a good culture fit with that vertical. And so what I found when I joined is that we had a vast majority of these businesses that were suffering from the same problems, right? They were personal injury attorneys and they had a very specific set of challenges that because of that focus, we became very expert at solving. At the same time, our CEO and founder, Rustin, was very much a build versus buy kind of guy. So instead of operating off of WordPress and, sort of third-party tools, he was really committed to developing software to build websites and local marketing. So again, for context, what Scorpion does is it services primarily local service businesses with an emphasis on initially attorneys. And so what we would sell is websites and PPC and SEO, and eventually social media and video marketing, all the sort of the local service-based business related, type of products that you would expect. And So that build versus buy, what that meant was that we built our internal software that hosted our websites, our client websites. It would run our PPC campaigns. I think there was a moment where we brought like a third party, like a Marin, into the agency, and then took it out because it was just not flexible enough. In any event, there was always an investment of developing custom software that allowed us ultimately to deliver better results for our clients. And so what did that mean? That meant that when a personal injury attorney would sign a contract, a digital contract based on a system that we created, as soon as that was digitally signed, a series of workflows would be triggered that the writers would start writing content, the designers would start designing a website, so on and so forth. And so what that allowed us to do from an operations perspective was allowed us to grow much faster than if we were doing everything sort of bespoke and manually. And I think a big part of that initial early success was due to the fact that we were focused in on one buyer, which ultimately allowed us to do the same thing, relatively the same thing over and over and over, which allowed us to get some scale. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I find so fascinating about this is, I have a very strong point of view on this. I really believe that services in software are going to come back in style. And if you think about what a software platform is, it's really just technology leveraging an existing process and making it happen faster, more efficiently, more predictably, with more scale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I have this saying, which is software is a really bad way to figure out what works and a really good way to scale what works, right? It's an expensive and slow and arduous way to try and find product market fit. But services have the opposite set of qualities. They tend to be a little bit more difficult to scale, but they're a wonderful way to get close to a problem and understand the requirements and iterate on the process. And this is what I think is so brilliant about a services-led product development process. You're taking all the things that a software company has to do to build world-class product, and then you're using that to get paid to fund the product development. And what's even more fascinating is it de-risks the commercial success of the product, which I think a lot of agencies that have tried to build a side kind of SaaS company out of the agency are missing out on, which is you could make an investment into that technology. It never actually becomes commercially successful in the sense that someone is buying that platform and subscribing to it and it becomes a standalone SaaS product. But what you've done, if you've increased the efficiency of that service offering, you will get a return in perpetuity on the additional gross margin that creates for you.
Correct.
And so I think it's just something that people aren't talking enough about, but I think is going to become much more common in SaaS as we've seen a regression, I think, in momentum investing and more scrutiny on the real economics of software companies. What were some of the keys to success as it related to getting that level of scale through this model? What were some of the things that you had to do really, really well? Starting with the focus, of course.
Sure. And if it's okay, I would love to actually make one more comment about your previous point, which I think is interesting. So fast forward years down the road, where at Scorpion, we had a very optimized operation where we could bring on a client in a specific vertical that we knew that we were only selling into that specific vertical. And of course, by the way, you get salespeople who would get a creative sale, right? When you have a 100-person sales team, sometimes you get these these rogue sales that go, yeah, exactly. So you get these weird kind of sales that end up getting approved somehow, some way. And we had built up the operational side of the business so much so that it was like think about like a conveyor belt. Like everything there was like a step in the process, and anytime you would sell something that didn't fit the conveyor belt, you gum everything up, right? So over the years, we got really good at being specific on who we sold to. But from an enterprise sort of business perspective, the asset that we built, which was this extreme, somewhat extreme operational efficiency for our service business, what it allowed us to do, what it opened up for us, is to go acquire other agencies that had no way to build this because they just hadn't gotten that scale. And what the value proposition for us doing that is that as a result of being acquired by a company like Scorpion, we'll bring you onto our platform and reduce the overall operational costs and thereby increasing margin almost immediately. So it becomes a very interesting acquisition story.
Yeah. And when you think about valuation first, so again, even if you were going to be valued as a services company, you would be in the upper echelon of what those valuations could be because of the intellectual property, the clear documentation of process, the repeatability involved in everything. And so, it's this crazy thing where it's like the worst case scenario. If the thesis is we're building a SaaS company here, then your worst case scenario, your golden parachute, is we have a hyper successful, highly valuable services company that's delivering value to the marketplace and has enterprise value, which I think is a pretty compelling change on the thesis of what is typically the SaaS playbook, which is we have a theory, we raise money, we build it, and we have a very small target. And if we don't hit it, or we don't spend our money fast enough, or the fundraising ecosystem changes, then we're dead in the water. And even if we do get to 20, 30, $40 million in revenue to a venture capital firm that has limited partners who are banking on a unicorn, that's a failure in their eyes. Mm-hmm. And you won't even get the chance to sell that business or reach any liquidity from it. So as a founder, thinking about this as an alternative path, if you have that big vision, I think is really compelling.
I think another, I would agree with that. And I think a downside risk of, at least from a services business, focusing so heavily on becoming a SaaS business, like one of the sort of the keystone aspects of being a SaaS business is efficiency. It's like building out, like making everything super efficient. And it gets to a point, especially in a service-based business, at least when you're talking about working with local businesses as customers, but even enterprise, you can't substitute software for customer relationship. And at the end of the day, customer relationship kind of doesn't scale. And I think one area where businesses can get into trouble, and I've seen this firsthand, is that they forget about the fact that customer service is in some cases, some clients are more, that's more of a focus than others, but that you can't, that there's a risk that you over index on the efficiency side that could have an impact on the business.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. And this ties into one of the other core reasons that I think we're going to see services come back in style in tech, and that ecosystem of technology and services is going to shift over the next decade or so. And it's exactly what you're saying. There's a relationship aspect and there's the success aspect. I have kind of a second life that I live where I spend a lot of time in this community called SaaS Academy. And Dan Martell, one of my mentors in that group, says something that I think is really profound, which is SaaS should stand for success as a service, right? The software is meaningless unless the person using it is successful in achieving the business outcome that they want. And I think this is the reason that if you think about every successful B2B SaaS company, Salesforce and HubSpot and Marketo and Segment and all of these companies, all the SAPs, the Oracles, they either have a professional services team or they have a massive ecosystem around them of people that are helping fill in the gaps and cover the things that the software just can't cover: the strategy, the thinking, the data schema design, the process changes that have to map to how the system works, the change management that's involved. There's so many other aspects to the success of a client. And now with all this scrutiny on the unit economics of these companies, you're seeing more of these SaaS companies bring this in-house. So QuickBooks, we saw them compete with their own bookkeeping ecosystem. ClickUp, which is like a hyper-funded venture capital scale project management, they just built their own internal onboarding team. They have a professional services function now, and they're competing with their own ecosystem. I think we're going to see HubSpot did the same thing. You could do onboarding through them on top of them also having a services ecosystem. So I think my theory is we're going to see a lot more of that. And this difference of is it software, is it service, is going to become much more opaque, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. What matters is your customer getting successful?
Correct.
And is it profitable, and can it scale?
Correct. And the best way to measure that, end of the day, is going to be retention. Are you retaining your target customer longer, more successfully than, let's say, the competitors, right? If you're able to do that, then follow that as your guide on what the right level set needs to be.
Yeah. And so I want to ask you an interesting question, which is with all of these changes happening in the world, where do you see services going over the next decade or two? And what do you think is going to be important for those running an agency, a services firm, a consulting firm, in order to be successful and adapt to the changes that are coming down the pipe?
Great question. And I think that at the end of the day, when you're serving small, medium-sized businesses, again, that's the majority of my experience, is that they're still going to need a someone to talk to, at least when it comes to digital marketing. I even think about the world of trading and stocks, and that back in the day, everyone had a financial advisor or a stockbroker, and now there's E-Trade, and you're able to actually do sort of more functional trading. But as a family man, and building, raising my family, building my own retirement, things like that, there's only so much I could do by myself with just technology. I do need to talk to a financial planner, someone who's an expert who can help me to get the results I need to get to. And so while I think the tool set is evolving rapidly with ChatGPT and AI, I frankly don't care how my financial advisor gets his recommendations, as long as they're the good recommendations. Just like I don't think that an agency client doesn't really care exactly how you generated the content, as long as it delivers the promise of what of the relationship that you have with your client. So if anything, it's going to allow agencies and expert businesses to be able to provide more value at lower cost. But there's not going to be, as far as I can tell, based on what I know today, there's not going to be a really good substitute for having a person-to-person relationship to help the customer or the client be able to achieve the outcomes that they came to you for.
Hey, it's Marcel here, and I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you are, then I want to encourage you to check out the Agency Profitability Toolkit. It's a free set of resources that we've put together to help agency owners just like you improve their profitability. It's full of free checklists, templates, and training videos, and has helped thousands of agencies get better at measuring the essentials of their business. So if you want to grab a free copy of that, you can head to parakeeto.com/toolkit or look for a link wherever you're watching or listening to this. With that, I want to thank you again for tuning in, and I'll let you get back to the episode.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think professional services are going anywhere. And the way I see it is like, even if you look at technology, it's like you see a market get fragmented and then consolidated, and fragmented and consolidated. It's just, there's kind of this virtuous cycle of, private equity and venture capital. They're always just kind of like birthing this whole new ecosystem of tools. Like, look at time tracking. I bet you in 10 years, a private equity firm will have rolled up half the time tracking tools that we use, and then it will all proliferate again. But it'll be in a new form, because there'll be some new technology platform, maybe AI, that it's like, you don't even need to track your time. It'll track it for you, and it'll be following you around and watching what you do. And so I think the same thing is kind of true in services. With every layer of disruption, there's a new layer of complexity that needs to get managed. And if there's a group of people that can develop expertise, there will always be a market for someone wanting to pay to accelerate, to deepen their understanding, to defer innovation to someone else whose core focus is innovating in that area and understanding it and staying abreast of the changes. So that, I think, is all true. What I also think is true, though, and you alluded to this, is the margin pressure is going to continue to go up, as it has for the last decade. And I think we've responded with specialization, niching down. That's been the trend over the last decade. But also, I think the level of sophistication operationally is going to continue to go up, especially if you start to see SaaS companies, especially funded SaaS companies, enter the marketplace. Like, I look at what they do just from like data management, for example. They're like 2 decades ahead of professional services in terms of their level of sophistication there. So with that combination of factors, what do you think is going to change about how an agency needs to position, execute, sell, deliver in order to stay competitive when those two forces are coming after them?
Well, this goes, for me, the first and foremost thing that every agency needs to do is to become a specialist in not just in what you do, but also who you serve, because what you do these days is changing too rapidly. It's like, you could be the foremost, expert in TikTok videos. That's great. That's your specialty. What's going to happen, in 3 months when Threads ultimately takes over, potentially, who knows? I know they're not the same platform, but the point is that, what I'm focusing a lot of my time and effort on right now, I'm writing a book, I'm doing all this podcast, all this stuff, is because I am super passionate about the getting the idea out there that for an agency to really scale and win, they need to become a specialist in serving a specific vertical market. And that is a way to not only differentiate and stand out, but it's also a way to provide superior value, because it's through that focus that you're going to become an expert at solving really expensive, hard problems for that target audience. There's no other way to get there except through focus.
I completely agree. And I've talked about this on the podcast before. I think so many people, when you start talking about niching down and focusing, everybody thinks about it in this very mechanical way of, oh, well, we do Facebook ads, or we do TikTok ads, or we do this service and that service. And it's like, no, the real question is, what problem do you solve and who do you solve it for? Mm-hmm. And what you do is only relevant in relation to that, right? And that methodology will likely change, but your perspective, your point of view, the high level strategy, the framework for how to accomplish an outcome probably won't change nearly as quickly. And so I agree that is absolutely essential. I think today, frankly, it's table stakes. If you're not doing that, then you're probably struggling already. Mm. I have a thesis that I want to bounce off you, if I could, Corey, please. Which is that there's a next frontier of specialization that I'm seeing, which is specialization at the operations level. So level one is we're clear about who we serve and what problem we solve for them. But level two is we're clear about, as a business, what our strengths are, so we can double down on the things that we are innately good at and remove the operational overhead of the things we're not good at. So for example, an SEO firm that we worked with that was great at sales, great at strategy, great at account management, but we're not actually that great at the tactical SEO delivery. So they would partner with white label agencies to do delivery and push all that revenue out. But they scaled to 8 figures, had crazy EBITDA, had great processes, because they understood that as a team, that's really the thing that we're excellent at. So I see that as kind of the next frontier, is like not only knowing who you serve and what you do, but looking inwards and specializing even further. I'm curious what you think about that, if that resonates with your experience.
100%. I think about companies like the airline industry. You have two different airlines. You have Southwest Airlines and you have Singapore Airlines. They are two very different personalities if you look at them from a personality perspective. One, Singapore Airlines, they've got 3 different seating classes, and they've got flight attendants who are very concerned about every little detail about your experience on the plane. Then you have Southwest Airlines, which is one seating class. You have quirky kind of flight attendants, and it just serves a different audience. And I think there's a story about this company called Continental. I don't think they're an airline anymore, but they were sort of a premium airline back in the day. And they, what they decided to do was they wanted to compete with the low cost carriers like the Southwests of the world. And so they came up with this concept, this whole secondary sort of business line called Continental Light. And it was meant to compete. And the reality is that despite how hard they tried to make that work, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars to get this business line off the ground. At the end of the day, their core competency, their unique value in the world, if you will, was that they were a premium airline. And that's what they were really good at. And they were just that's not who they were. And so I'm a big believer in this concept of really understanding what makes you as a business unique. What are you really uniquely good at? Like, what are you really special in a way that your buyers care about, and really lean into that. And if there's aspects of your business, to your point, that your business that your buyer really cares about, but you're not particularly good at, I'm all in favor of finding a better who, if you will, who knows who that is their specialty, and let them do what they're great at, freeing you up to really pour that time and resources into doubling down on what's working for you.
It's a great analogy, because I think a big part of the reason I believe in this thesis is when I look at all these industries that have become commoditized long before professional services became commoditized, they all kind of follow the same pattern, which is this like increasing fragmentation of the supply chain. And you see it a lot in logistics, you see it a lot in all kinds of like consumer packaged goods, where you look at the supply chain and it's becoming more and more fragmented over time, because you have all these like specialized pieces of the puzzle, and they like kind of nestle into this thing and get really efficient and innovate on like how to actually do that thing. And so, yeah, I think that focus is both external and internal, but focus is the message at the end of the day. So with that, like, how is that applying to, who are you working with? Firstly, what kind of scale are they at? And how are you taking these concepts and applying it to them?
So I'm focused on helping 1,000 digital marketing agencies transform from being a market generalist, meaning serving all shapes and sizes, doing all these different things, to become a vertical market specialist. And there's three things that I encourage agency owners to look at their business and see if this is true for them. First thing is that it's just hard and expensive to acquire customers or new clients. It's just there's no pipeline, there's no rhyme or reason, no science there. That's really hard. Plus, if client churn is just too high, and if you're not innovating, if you're not spending time and resources building out the services and the products that you provide in better and better ways, if all three of those are true, then there's a chance that you may be saying yes to too many different types of companies, and it may be time to think about verticalizing and narrowing your focus and becoming an expert in solving one problem for a specific audience.
Yeah, amazing. So for those of you listening that are maybe in that seat, or you're thinking I'm just not niche enough, we'll leave some details to Corey and his information in the show notes. So with that, Corey, for those that want to connect with you,
Sure.
Where should we send them in the show notes?
Sure. So you can go to my website. It is CoreyQuinn.com. And I also, if it's okay with you, I have a new sort of potentially valuable piece of content that could be good for your listeners. A lot of the agencies I talk to rely on inbound, and inbound is just not a scalable way to grow your business. And so I have a free 6-day email course about how to actually get scale out of outbound. It's something we deployed at Scorpion. It's what took us from 20 million to 40 million just by applying this framework. So it's a 6-step email course. If it's okay, I'll share the URL. It's called getoutboundroi.com. That's getoutboundroi.com. It's a free 6-day email course where you'll get to learn the 6 keys to getting ROI from your outbound. If that's of interest to you, that's available to you. Other than that, I'm on LinkedIn and would love to connect with anyone.
Amazing. And your book, Focus Vertical, depending on when this is airing, it's probably coming out right around a similar time.
Yeah.
So we'll leave some links to that in the show
you.
notes, either to check it out before it comes out, or if it's already out by the time this gets released, I'm not quite sure, then we'll have a link to it there as well. So all of that stuff that Corey mentioned in the show notes, his LinkedIn, his website, the outbound email course, as well as the book. And with that, Corey, any final words of advice for our listeners?
I would just say that if you are thinking about verticalizing your business and are suffering maybe from some of the things that we talked about, then I advise you to go into your book of business and just take a look and see really who is your best fit customer, and think about ways to focus on them going forward. Because if you could narrow that focus, you're going to get a lot of the benefits that we talked about today, based on my personal experience, as well as working with a lot of really smart agency owners. So that's my advice.
Sage advice, advice that I second. With that, Corey, thanks so much for making the time. It was great having you.
Likewise, Marcel. Appreciate the opportunity.